to part 2 of the fine art of collecting, the collector's experience. In preparation for this panel, I came across a quote from Mitchell Kahan, who's director of the Akron Museum of Art, and he once wrote, "It may be that initiation into an artist's work is like the first time with a lover. The exact date, place, and time will never leave you, although the loved one probably will. And the particular circumstance surrounding the initial encounter become an inseparable part of the affair itself. Like the image of the lover and the first time together, the memory of that first work remains vivid and returns over and over to haunt, to embarrass, or to amuse." Now, those of you who attended last week's session on the elements of collecting heard from art professionals on how to learn about art, identify your artistic interests, and get started collecting. You also learned about the various resources available to the beginning collector from individuals such as dealers, appraisers, authors, and online advisors. This evening we'll hear from 4 collectors: Richard Clark, next to him is Gregory Peterson, then Walter Evans, and Nancy Lane. And I hope that they will be able to convey to you their first love affair with art and share their personal experiences about getting started and continuing with their passion. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each one individually, not necessarily in the order that they're seated here, so pay attention. And I'm going to ask them specific questions, and some will show slides so that we can advance the discussion a little, and then towards the end I'll have some more general questions for them, and then we'll open up the discussion to you. So I wanted to start with Richard Clark to my immediate right. He started collecting quite young, as a teenager, some years ago. In addition to collecting African-American artists, he also has a distinguished collection of African-American art, as well as rare books, letters, and memorabilia. And Richard, I wanted you to talk a bit about your involvement with living artists. You've counted them among your friends, and I want you to talk about how that's enhanced your experience of collecting, and then I want you to show some of the works from your collection and talk about how you acquired them.
Well, I guess I'd have to take a page from the president's wife and say that at the time that I began to become interested in art, Harlem was indeed a village. And by that I mean most of the artists that I collected, some of them that I collected anyway, lived in and around Harlem. Reardon had a studio down the street. Norman Lewis had a studio down the street. Norman and I used to go to Chockville and Us, which used to be on this corner here, every Saturday morning to buy donuts and coffee, and I would go back to his studio and chat with him until my coffee was finished. Then I'd go down to my office, which was on 125th Street and Lenox Avenue, to wash the windows and sweep the floor. We didn't have any help at the time, and that was it. I started collecting drawings, prints, anything that caught my fancy. And I want to emphasize this evening, a lot of people that I speak to seem to have the need to collect an original piece of art. They wanted a painting, and the only painting that that artist has done, or whatever. If you're going to begin to collect art, prints are probably a good place to start. Prints and drawings, depending on the depth of your pocket. Artists like to make prints. It's an experimental process in which they are engaged with the printmaker, and the artist and the printmaker have a working relationship, and they pull prints. And in many instances, most of the artists that I know don't make an awful lot of prints. A limited edition of one of 25 or 50 in most cases is a fairly reasonable number of prints. I started with prints, then I moved on to paintings, and moved on to sculpture, and a little later on we'll see some of the slides. I was going to do that now. Okay. May I say that you may want to start to read books before you start collecting. The first real book with color prints in it that I saw was a book by Cedric Dover called Negro in the Art. It's back in print now by the New York Graphic Society. That's the first place that I saw paintings by some of the people whose work I'm going to show you this evening. I read a great deal about art before I began to collect it. I read a great deal about artists before I began to visit with them. And the same thing can be said of African art. Hale Woodruff, one of my mentors, a great painter, great teacher, told me that before I buy any piece of African art, I should at least read 10 books. And he gave me a bibliography of 5 of the 10 books that I should read. And I did indeed read those books. So when I saw a piece of African art, I had a sense of where it came from. I had a sense of the value of the piece in terms of the texture and the patina and all of the other factors that I learned from reading about art and about African art. Your eye will become much better and your collection will be much more enhanced by the education that you provide for yourself before you begin to collect. Can we going to do it this way, with the lights as they are? Okay. I was speaking about prints. I purchased this print back in, I guess, 1972 from Terry Dittenfast. This is Jake Lawrence from a very popular series of his, a very important series called The Miners Come to Vote. Historically, we were going through the civil rights movement and the voting rights bill was up before the Congress, and painters like Jake Lawrence, Romare Beard, and a number of the others are not just fine artists. They are intellectuals in the sense that they are they sense what's going on in the environment in which they live, and they react to that. Most painters do, but I think African American painters, because of the closeness of which we all live, perhaps it's truer with that group than with almost any. You will see here the voters coming to register. Here's the voting booth, people waiting, maybe the people watching, and here you see Jake has included a number of people who are waiting, and by their dress you can see they've come from a cross-section of the community, and they're a cross-section of ages as well. Here's an older person with his or her cane, here's a young person, here's a younger person over here as well. So he has taken into the whole concept of this painting the necessity and the urgency and the energy of people coming to vote. Now this is a painting by Margaret Goss Burroughs, a Chicago painter. This was in a WPA show here at the Studio Museum, and I prayed hard and hard that no one would buy the painting before I had an opportunity to talk to the fellow who loaned the painting to the Studio Museum. He was in Chicago, and as soon as the show was closed and they had sent the paintings back, I got on a plane and I went out to talk to him. I talked to him for about 3 or 4 hours before we got around to talking about this particular piece. This is an important painting not only because it is a very fine painting, but it was a painting that, what's Kramer's first name? Hilton Kramer, who used to be a very fine critic, who is now a curmudgeon, said he had come up to review this, and he said that this is one of the finest paintings he's seen. It's a very painterly piece, and he was happy that the Studio Museum had this in the show. Now this young lady, it's called The Red Hat, incidentally. It's about circa 1936. I double-checked that with Feldman. This young lady was a lady of easy virtues who, when she did not, was not working at night, would pose for these painters. And she got paid, for her work, but she would never speak to them about what she did. But most of the artists knew pretty much what she did because they were familiar with the neighborhood in which she plied her trade, so to speak. There's an innocence about this young lady that is captivating. that look in her eyes, that little slight pucker here, the hat sitting in a slightly rakish sort of an angle that makes this whole painting very appealing. This is another Chicago painter. Well, he's in New York now, Elzia Couture. He's a classical painter in the sense that he primes his canvas, he prepares his canvas in such a way that I am told, and by no other artist, no other person other than Archibald Motley, who, upon finding out that I knew this painter, said he is one of the finest painters in the country. Now, Elzia Couture won a Rosenwald Fellowship some years ago, and he painted a piece with a young lady sitting in front of a bureau, you know, those old-fashioned bureaus where the mirror used to tilt and there were drawers on the side. Anybody who shakes their head is as old as I am. She was sitting in front of that. There was a cat on the floor, and there was a red piece of carpet. This is not this painting. It's a painting that is not here that I'm describing, the Rosenwald piece. There was a red piece of linoleum on the floor, and that was done sometime in the 30s. And if you saw that painting today, that linoleum will be as bright red as it was when he painted it. His wife came from the Gullah region of the Carolinas, and they have sort of an elongated neck, a sort of a graceful way about them. And although they are now separated and divorced, this style repeats itself in many of his paintings. You see the graceful elongated neck that I was speaking about, and the lithe body, etc. And this is called Classical Study number 15. I saw this in a show in Boston, actually. I had only seen his work in Dover's book, and I happened to go up to Boston to Barry Gaither's museum up there, and his work, and Lee Smith and Rex Gorley's work. Rex Gorley, a watercolorist whose work is very fine. This was in the show, and he came up to see the show himself, and I approached him and I said, you know, I've been trying to find you and one of your paintings for the very longest time. I'd like to buy that painting. And he said, really? You know, artists really are. I don't know how they are today because I haven't approached an artist for a purchase recently. And but artists do want to sell, and they're always pleased when someone's interested in their work. This is by Romare Bearden. It's an important piece of work to me because it tells a story that very few people know about Romare Bearden. At the bottom of the painting here, you see a little boy holding the hand of a man with a guitar. This is actually a blind man who lived in the same neighborhood that Romare Bearden lived when he was in North Carolina. On Saturdays, Bearden would have to take him up to the country just outside of town to pick berries. And he would sit on the edge, you know, of a log or something like that, and Romy would pick the berries while this man played the guitar. The man's mother said, you know, that Romy would be taking him out to get some fresh air, so to speak. And when Romy brought the berries back, the man's mother rather, would bake a pie and give it to Romy, and this is how Romy made his weekend money. This was a gift from a dear friend of mine with whom I spent a great deal of time talking about art, and he said, Richard, I want you to have this, and because it's an important piece to me, on the proviso that you will always loan it out if someone asks to loan it out, and of course I've done exactly that. Thanks.
That's a great lead-in to the presentation, the question I wanted to ask Dr. Walter Evans. Dr. Evans has collected books and art for over 30 years, and his collection focuses on 19th and 20th century African-American artists. And this evening, The catalog of his collection is available, and he'll be signing copies of it after our discussion this evening. Dr. Evans, today there's much interest in promoting African American artists in the marketplace and art museums in order to assure their place in art history. How would you describe the role of the collector in this project? How important is it for the collector to donate works to museums and make works in their collections available to lend to exhibitions? And then I'd also like you to just talk about one instance of like a very exciting acquisition that you made.
Thank you, Laura. May I first tell a little bit about how I got started collecting?
Sure.
And then I'll answer your question. When I was growing up in Savannah, Georgia, as one of the ladies in the audience is from, we weren't allowed to go into museums. And my family moved to Beaufort, South Carolina when I was about 4 years old in the Dollar region there, and I stayed there until I was 11, when my father died in an auto accident, and then the family moved to Connecticut. And by that time, I was no longer interested. I wasn't interested in any art. It wasn't available for me in the South because we couldn't go in. And then, but what happened to me, how I got interested in it, is that I was living in Philadelphia in the Navy, not long after high school, and I was invited to go to the Philadelphia Museum of Art on a date. And when I left the museum, I realized that this was probably the first time I had ever been into a major museum. I also realized my ignorance. So I didn't want to appear ignorant to this lady, so I went to the library and read all about the Rembrandts and the Van Goghs and all the other European American and American artists that I saw. It never really even occurred to me that there was no African American art in the Philadelphia Museum of Art or the Rodin or Museum or any of the other major museums in Philadelphia. But by the next time we went into that museum on another day, she never knew that I knew nothing about these artists because I was more versed than she was, probably. I went on to college and medical school and had finished my residency. That a lady by the name of Shirley Reed was working in an art gallery in Detroit. And it convinced me to buy a Jacob Lawrence print series that the DIA had commissioned. And I bought that. Shortly thereafter, about a week later, I was invited to a party by Denny Prim, who lives here in New York. And it was a party from the Net Dance Studio. It was a fundraiser, as a matter of fact. I met for the first time. We had a similar type party as a fundraiser, and it was a big success. I thereafter went on to, in short order, this is how these things work. I knew nothing about African American art up until the time that I acquired the Jacob Lawrences. Then I started reading just as I had done earlier. And then met twin daughters who were about 9 years old at the time. This is in the early 80s now. Out to meet him in Seattle, and came back here to New York, and from Terry Denton-Foss I acquired the card game. I've since gone on to collect the largest number of Jacob Lawrence paintings in private hand, which is about prints. I've also commissioned a Bearden for there are a couple of paintings in this catalog that I hope you'll see that I commissioned. Bearden, Catlett, Richard Hunt, and Jacob Lawrence to do. And I realized museums, and this is why I started, so that they could see them in my home. And most of the works I collected early on were objective works that had the black image in it. I since realized that this was a mistake. I passed up some very good buys on people like Joshua Johnson is now quite out of my range. But anyway, I put together, at least my wife put together, a traveling exhibition that has now traveled to over 30 museums. I think it is extremely important for the collector to share this work, especially in relationship to African you cannot find in museums the way you can European Americans' work. It has changed some. They're now clamoring to get works by African Americans, but it is nowhere near what it should be. In terms of gifting works, I've also done that. In fact, when my exhibition was traveling in Nashville, Tennessee at the Cheekwood Museum, the curator asked me if I would give him William Scott work. And immediately I said yes, because it was a work that belonged in Nashville. It was a work of Meharry University, the founders of Meharry. I had attended Meharry for 2 years, and they were shocked that I said yes immediately. So I also think it's important, if the collector so desires, to donate works to museums. That is, museums that are sympathetic and museums that will show the work. You asked me if I would share a couple of experiences with you. There's one I'd like to tell, and that is about the piano lesson by Romy Bearden. Bearden met me at Cordia Ekstrom shortly after he had done this work. And he said, so I called my best friend, whom I grew up with in Hartford, Connecticut, Les Payne. I said, Les, I want you to go by Cordia and find out and look at the piano lesson. Tell me what you think of it. Les went by and he reported back to me, no, don't buy it, it's too flat. Well, as we all know, August Wilson wrote the play, The Piano Lesson, based only in shown all the world, and I'm here kicking myself because I didn't acquire it. Well, after Romy had, a few years after Romy had died, Les and I were visiting Nanette at her apartment on Canal Street, and I told her the story about what my good buddy had done and pointed to him. And she said, well, you're in luck. She said, because I have a painting, the one you saw was mostly watercolor. I have the painting that the prints were done from and that were used and that August Wilson had seen. And she brought out this gorgeous painting that gave me a second chance, which I didn't, which I acquired. And I don't want to take up too much more time, but other works that are special to me, well, there are a number. This was a commissioned piece that I did. Actually, Katla did this down in her studio in Cuernavaca, and I visited her several times when she was doing it. These three works are very special to me. These are actually the original works that were done for God's Trombones by Aaron Douglas. I have 3 of them. I think there were 7 works originally. And one is extremely special because it's about my hometown in Savannah, Go Down Deaf. The sermon was actually preached about cystic in Savannah. This work is also very special to me because when I acquired this work, The Negro Speaks of Rivers by Aaron Douglas, I didn't know until I was reading Arnold Rampasa's book that Langston Hughes, actually Aaron Douglas gave this work to Langston Hughes in 1946 when he was commissioned. The poem was actually written by Langston Hughes in 1921. But when I was reading Rampasa's book, I found out that Langston Hughes made greeting cards. So I made it my goal to find some of those greeting cards that Langston had done, and I found about 3 originals.
I think we have time for maybe one more example.
Okay.